Hello, welcome to
Oh,
another
we're
Humpday
live. Okay,
Q&A.
Dash, you go sit
Yeah,
back over here. Yes.
so,
Good morning, Simon. Well, good morning for me, and afternoon, evening for you, somewhere in there.
there we go. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
uh, it's a very dark evening in this place of the world. Anyway, right.
Yep.
Um, let's crack on through the usual bits, and then we can get to the good stuff. So,
Get to the good stuff.
welcome to another Humpday Q&A. Let's get through the do's
Yay.
and don'ts pretty quickly. Be nice, respectful, constructive, and yeah, don't post anything adult content or offensive. The usual things. No advertising. Don't keep posting questions again and again. And as we said before, post your questions in the live chat with a Q, please, so we can identify them. And yeah, no harassment. You'll be banned. We've warned you. And very especially, do have a good time. So today we have Roman joining us. So we'll go through quickly, just in case you don't know if it's your first time here. My name's Simon Lightfoot, community leader, CTO of Dev Angels London. You can follow me on Twitter at Dev Angels London. Randall.
And I'm Randall Schwartz. I'm a Dart and Flutter GDE, which means we now will have two GDEs on this show. Where else do you find that? And I'm also the guy watching the question in the live chat. If you put Q: in front of it, then I'll know that it's a question for us and not just random chat, which also happens in the channel. So be sure to label your questions.
And let's introduce Roman. Roman, welcome to the stream.
Yay.
Hello, Simon. Hello, Randall. How you guys doing? This is the Flutter show to watch. So anybody who's not tuning in is not where they should be right now. So again, thank you guys. This is a pleasure for me to be here. I've been wanting to come in the show, certain logistics and whatnot, but finally made it. Thank you so much for the invitation, and hello to everybody on the stream.
And thanks for being here too. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So you're a Flutter GDE, and I know you're the organizer of GDG Lawrence, and obviously you can follow you on Twitter at Dr. Codes with a Z.
Yes.
Yeah. Introduce, what have you been up to? What have you been doing in the Flutter sphere?
That's a great question, Simon. Again, I'm a little bit conflicted because I'm a big fan of the two of you right there. So again, I'm very humbled to be here. So thank you. So yes, a little bit about myself, just for those of you who don't know me. Again, I'm a Flutter GDE. I am a lead organizer at GDG Lawrence. We do a lot of things around cloud and Flutter activities as well. I'm also a mentor for the Northeast of the United States for all the GDG communities. So it's just great for me to be sharing my knowledge about Flutter. So a little bit about the activities that we've been doing. I've been actually working with a lot of the Google Student Developer Clubs, spreading the good word about Flutter, bringing them into the Flutter ecosystem, doing like workshops, code labs, and whatnot. So you've also seen a couple of the posts that I've been doing on my Twitter feed about like any cool Flutter applications that I build, but I still don't finish. I like to share it with a lot of people. They see so that they can see the potential and the great things that they can do in Flutter. I've also been doing some live streamings every week about like developing casual games in Flutter. Randall, he's an amazing supporter and mentor as well. Also flagging questions and keeping me in check. So thank you, Randall. Also, I've been serving as a mentor for some of the activities that you, Simon, you have been doing great with, Flutter London and the communities with the Flutter Dev Camp that you guys have been doing. So amazing.
I was just going to say thank you so much for joining the Dev Camp and being one of the mentors and doing a presentation about game dev, because I think that I learned a lot from watching that. So I've never used the game toolkit. So I learned that. I was like, oh, this is cool. This actually is going to make a big impact. So that's awesome.
So cool. And that's great that you provide a platform for us Flutter enthusiasts, Flutter lovers, to continue spreading the good word about Flutter, what's possible in Flutter, and be also objective of, what Flutter is really good for. Because sometimes people think like us GDEs, we're trying to push an agenda and say, yeah, Flutter is the best thing. Drop JavaScript or any other. No, we tell you what Flutter is good for, what's not good for. We try to be objective. And we just try to have fun in the process by sharing our knowledge with the rest of the world. So thank you, everybody, for joining.
Craig says it's great to see you. That's nice.
Great.
So yeah, just a quick little thing. Yeah, we're going to try and keep the show short today. So yeah, as always, we try and keep it short. So get your questions in now, get them in with a Q in the chat, and we can go from there. And I think in the background here, I hear a Scott. Hey, Scott, he made it.
Oh, there you go.
I made it. Unfortunately, due to some difficulties, I am not on the admin account, so Simon's going to have to handle all the questions. Blame him when it goes wrong. Oh man!
Thanks
So
for
hey,
that. Drop me
Roman,
in the
are
deep
you
end.
following me? What's going on?
Yes, I
man?
am. Hey, Scott.
How many
I was
times
just
have we been
mentioning-
together in the past 10 days?
Scott and I were at this event on Sunday at DevFest, North Carolina. We had a blast. Me and him, we were just running the show. That's what I love about like these type of communities. Like one of the most friendliest communities is the Flutter community. Not to bash on anybody else, but we love how friendly we are, how we collaborate with one another. No animosity, no egos. We leave that at the door. Scott and I, riffing about Flutter, feeding off of each other, praising one another, and that's what we did on Sunday. So, Scott, floor is yours.
Now, to give you an idea, okay, Roman and I hung out last Thursday night.
Last Thursday also we were hanging
Friday
out.
night.
It's Friday we were hanging
Saturday.
out. Also Saturday.
I'm
then
jealous.
North Carolina Dev Fest. No, we hung out in person there, and then North Carolina Dev Fest remotely. We did a panel together, and then we each did talks. 3 talks between the two of us?
Yes.
I think plus the panel. And now he follows me into here. So no. See, it's a slippery slope, man. You're sliding into the black hole here. Next thing you know, you'll be on the show every week.
That's true. As many times you guys allow me to be, I can crash it. If you guys allow me to crash it, I'll be here.
Come on in. Can always use the help.
Anytime, sir.
Yeah.
So where are we at here? I can't see the questions. So
I was gonna say what's the best state management questions will be flagged.
Wait a minute.
That's a good one. So Scott handles all those. What's the best state management in Flutter, right?
Well, no. Here's the one. What are the best state management questions?
Oh, okay. Pretty good. We got to establish.
So, I mean, we get this all the time, right? There's a few questions that we always pretty much get every week, and one of those is going to be like, "What's the best state management?" It's like any state management, any just pick one and be consistent. And use it.
Pick one and be consistent. Correct.
Oh yeah, there's the one we shall not speak of.
Yeah.
But other than that, yes.
That's not a state management package. That's a thing that's trying to do so many things. It wants to be its own framework. But
yes.
In any event, most of the state management packages are really good at their own approaches. Yeah, Mike, it is. Scott management is impossible.
What's the best Scott management? That's a good one.
Yeah, really. Oh, thanks, Craig. Buddy,
hey, Craig joined.
Craig, who skipped out on me on Monday. We were supposed to meet at the Google offices. Instead, he was home playing with his dog.
And for those of you who have not watched Craig's video on gesture detectors and all of that, you guys are in for a treat. Watch that if you want to have not only learn about Flutter, learn about that, but also have a nice laugh. So, Craig, thank you for that contribution. That was amazing.
You can find that on the official Flutter YouTube channel under Decoding Flutter.
Yep.
So. All right, let's get to the first few questions that we.
I'm sorry. Let me finish a thought here. We got sidetracked. Best state management. Really, they use different approaches. Okay, scope model and provider are fairly simple in the same approach. Riverpod is a good bit more complex in the same vein as those two. Gives you a lot more capability. But if you don't need all that capability, you might just want to keep it simple. Then turning the other way. There's Redux and Fish Redux. Okay, Fish Redux is made by Alibaba, and 50 million Chinese users cannot be wrong. But that's for managing a massive app. I mean, Alibaba is like Amazon's terrified of Alibaba. Then the other one, Block, is kind of similar to using Redux. It's a similar structure, which basically means Redux and Block if you're using a team of a lot of people and you don't want somebody to screw things up, those are good choices. There's some boilerplate involved, but there's a lot of safety involved. So it's kind of, and the other main one that Simon and I like to do a lot of times is just create a model and use ancestor state of type, stick an instance of it down there in the state and then access it through
it's the context, those functions in context, like ancestor state of type, ancestor widget of type, all those kind of things, they go up the tree looking. So there's it's essentially a while loop, and it just checks it goes up each of the parents to try and find something. It means that you've got a very limited scope, right? Like it's only going to do 20 checks or 50 checks if you're doing something locally. But if you've got some global state, then you probably want to use something that's cached, and that's where inherited widget comes in. And those are the other options. Like, so when it comes down to like provider, they all base themselves on inherited widget.
The other thing too is when using that, when using ancestor state of type or ancestor widget of type, you want to be careful not to use it deep down in a tree. Okay, you want to be aware of how deep is your tree from your run app or from your good grief, come on, my app, basically where your my app is. If you're way down, as Simon said, you're going to be running a loop to find this thing. And now if you're only 8 or 9 build methods away from your my app, that's fine. But if you've got something crazy going on where you automatically used a function to create a whole bunch of widgets and they happen to be in a tree, might not be a good idea.
I'll give you a good example of where I actually recently used ancestor state of type, and that was with a form. So each of the form fields I needed to register with a form element. These are custom form fields and form structure. So basically each form field that gets overridden goes and looks for the parent form and then registers itself with it. And that happens once, during a init state. Once it's been built, it's not happening on every frame, it's not happening on every build, and it's just there, it's done, and they're linked up. And when you need to validate, it validates. Done. Simple.
I liked one of your videos, Simon, and one of the sessions that you did a while back where you showed a very simple way on how to navigate up the tree without rebuilding the whole thing and only updating the pertinent things in the widget hierarchy. I just got to give it to the Flutter team also on naming convention, like the longest method names, for example, depend on inherited widget of exact type. I've seen people even creating their own inherited widget provider, like overriding the .off method. Guys, if you want to do that, perfect. If you want to tinker, that's great. But just like my fellow panelists here say, you try to stick with one, type of state management. For example, in my case, I love using Provider and Riverpod. I mean, Remy cannot go wrong when he suggests those two, right? And and I've already released about 5 or 6 Flutter applications already. I'm not building a Alibaba application every day. So that's why when you stick with a simple state management solution that at least keeps you a clean separation of concerns, you're good to go. So there's no excuse for you to not be adopting one of those type of providers, which are really simple and get you the work done. Again, as long as you keep a clean separation of concerns, a great widget composition, that should be great for all your app needs, pretty much.
So the questions are coming thick and fast. So I think we'll get right on those.
Let's do those. Yeah.
So, what is the best navigation package for us to use for devices only?
What capability do you want?
Thank you. What's the capability? Yes.
That's you've always got to consider, and that's with state management too. What kind of capability do I need? Go router is fantastic, but it could be overkill.
I felt like the navigation 2.0 at the beginning was a little bit verbose and a little bit like a lot of boilerplate. Then I loved how the great Chris Sells actually started the Go router, and then he kind of simplified how that all that was more transparent for people. Now I'm ready to adopt Navigator 2.0 using the Go router. So just like you, Scott, I'm for example, I'm transitioning from Navigator to 1.0, just using like Navigator.off and using that strategy. Now using Go Router, which is more declarative. I don't like that imperative approach. I'm more towards the same declarative approach that Flutter works. So I love that Go Router. I love how you can specify that in a declarative fashion. You have deep linking support, and now it works very well across all platforms. So I would go for like Go Router, and you wouldn't go wrong with that.
I'm gonna say like there's like, just because Go Router was made from someone from Flutter doesn't mean that's the one to go for. There's plenty of other great things out there.
What I was
and I'm just gonna bring up on stream here if this will work. Let's see.
While you're doing that, that's an interesting point. The newest packages aren't necessarily the best. They might give you capabilities that others didn't, but you might not need those capabilities for what you're doing.
It's true. It's true. Like just because one might be like the hype or like the latest shiny object, you shouldn't have to jump into that because you're bringing all the overhead of those things that you don't need. So I'm in totally agreement with you, Scott.
So here's another one. Beamer.
Oh, cool.
You go ahead with Beamer. Beamer is a good one. So that's an option to choose from. Very, very well documented. Is a Flutter favorite as well.
Does it follow like a declarative approach?
It's built on top of Router 2. Router 2.
Oh, okay. So
I think all of these ones are. So yeah, you've kind of got that kind of route builder here. Yes, in short, yes, you can do that. You've obviously got we said it before. Go Router is another option with great documentation and migration instructions and all sorts. There's also Route Master, which is by Tom Glider, a long-time member of the Flutter community. Again, Navigator 2.0 built with. So there's that. There's Quick Start Tour. All of these have really great documentation. Really great responses to bug fixing and so on.
Can you look at the scores? Can you look at the scores on some of those? For example, just click on the scores tab, because that's also a lot of the things Scott and I were mentioning this the other day. Like whenever you try to adopt a new package, always try to take a look at the scores, see how it's adopted, also the documentation, whether it supports sound null safety and those things. I definitely you see like some of those things that might give you a little bit of a pause, like should I adopt it or whatnot, but it's always great to
and also ignore the likes, ignore the stars.
Ignore the likes.
Look at how many people are using it.
Yes,
right. There's an interesting somebody just posted another question that's a rather interesting follow-up. They're talking about the get package. Is it good for other functions like route management? Get it by Thomas Burkhart is pretty darn good. I mean, that's really the get package there. Get it has been quite good. And Thomas did another talk on it recently, didn't he?
I'm not sure if it was on that, but he did. I think he used it in his package. So he did a talk at Flutter Vikings on isolates, and I think he was using it with that.
Oh yes, he did the isolate.
But anyway, there's questions are piling up. Get your questions. Just to repeat, get your questions in the chat. Make sure you put a Q in front of them, and we'll get to them. Get them in now before we have a close off, because we'll get a close off time. Matthew, Matthew was on. Was it last week? I've lost track of time. Welcome, Matthew. What is the coolest application of Flutter Game Dev Toolkit you've seen so far? I think that's to you, Roman. What have you seen? Have you seen anyone else's using the Flutter Game Dev Toolkit?
I could tell you one from the community, like a friend of mine. His name is Sirhan. He built like a web application. It's called, I think it's about like dogs, like wolves following a cat, or I think it was dogs following a cat. So Sirhan, shout out to you, because he adopted the Flutter, the casual game toolkit. He developed a cool application, and he actually made it available for the web. So it's a pretty cool, simple one. I wanted to highlight it because, again, he was one of the first people that I saw jumping in on that based on the live streams that we were doing. So we kind of motivated a few people to jump into that. But yeah, there's a couple other great offerings out there. Of course, you can't overlook the one that Philip created, which is a tic-tac-toe one, but using the casual game toolkit. So that was a pretty cool one. Yes,
I've got something else here to share. Just as you were saying that, just reminded me. I'll bring this up on stream as well. Funway coding. He's 13. He's doing Flutter development. He's
yeah,
nice.
I've forgotten his name. I know.
I think he just stole the title for youngest, because the youngest before this was what, 14, or actually now 16.
Anyway, he's Renuka's son. Renuka is the organizer of GDG, and this is what he made. He made this elf dodge, and this is the debug. This is the debug mode.
See,
the sound, but I've muted it. But yes, you have to like get the presence without getting hit by rocks, because then otherwise your score goes down. No, I've lost.
Very cool. Very cool.
There you go. So,
you know what I want to see? Oh, I was going to say, you know what I want to see is, let's have a contest for who can make apps for the Pixel Watch in Flutter.
So I did. There's actually a package. There's actually a package called Wear, which gives you the functionality of Google Wear on your Flutter apps as well. So if you're a round watch face or square watch face, and if you're in, if it's gone into like offline mode, so it goes into like a dark screen and things like that. You can, anyway, that's also run by the Flutter community. Anyway, let's crack on, I guess.
Yeah, Flash. That's true. Good old Flash. ActionScript 1.
Would you say using packages is good or bad? Should I always be trying to write my own stuff where I can, or is it using packages perfectly fine? I'm gonna give my opinion quickly first, and I'd say it's not a bad thing to write them yourself. However, that should just be from a learning perspective most times. I would say using packages is perfectly fine, but I think you need to also like rein in your package usage, because what you don't want to do, and here's the problem that most people have, is if you use a package, you're depending on someone else, right? You're depending on their code in your app. So for example, let's say we depended on GoRouter, and then GoRouter was completely discontinued by the author. Suddenly we're like, oh, I now need to rip out all the routing stuff and use the latest routing stuff because it's all changed, and I can no longer do that. So you're relying on third parties. So that's why you need to check into the package. Is it being actively maintained? Is the author doing things? Because that gives you the reliability you need in that package. What I'd say you don't want is to make your app just all these other packages and you're just gluing them all together, because now you don't own anything, right? You've got no control over anything. You're just trying to make sure nothing breaks ever because everyone's changing all the other code around, right? And I'll hand it off to everyone else.
Another interesting way to think about this is breadth and depth. Okay, if you've got one package that you're using and you're doing a whole lot of different things with it, well, maybe parts of that package are dependent on other parts of that package, are dependent on other parts of that package. So if one part of it breaks and you have to do a rewrite, you're going to have to rewrite all those different things in your app. It can be devastating. If you're using like 10 or 12 packages for little things, yeah, that's 10 or 12 packages that could go wrong. That's true. But the fixes might be quick because large hunks of your code are not dependent on it. You know, you've only got little bits and pieces here and there. So there's ease of coding, but you might be buying yourself a whole lot of technical debt at credit card interest rate prices, 25% on this technical debt that's really going to come around and bite you.
And I also look at, for example, small packages that do like very minimal things. And for example, like, why would you download a package that rounds the corner of your buttons? I mean, you could do that right there with just a few lines of code. Or like how to create, for example, like there's one package that does like a glowing effect. I'm like, I do that in 2 lines of code. Again, nothing wrong with those people who create these various packages and whatnot. Again, much power to you. But I also like, for example, like as far as the effort, like I wouldn't reinvent the wheel on the Flutter Fire package. Right. I would adopt a package like that. And then, for example, but not try to rely so many on little packages here and there. Just like Scott mentioned, you're going to be in a pickle. Like, try to be on the latest version of all of those. Yeah.
Well, you just gave me an idea. I think there's a lot of packages out there that show examples, right? They're almost like galleries of here's how you do this thing in Flutter, or right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering if we're missing. I'm thinking now that actually a great category for pub.dev maybe is to publish examples.
Samples, yes. I think that would be
so sample codes. Here's how you use this thing. There could be a proper archive then and a proper knowledge of this information as over time. It's also referenced against the Flutter version because they're rebuilt and checked against the latest Dart and Flutter things.
One interesting thing is no offense to people who do this or who actually get something out of it, but examples in isolation that cannot be run have been useless to me. A little piece of code, it's like, truth. Okay, fine. That's how you write like half of a build method.
Yeah, then what?
Great.
Yeah,
what do I do with it?
Yeah.
Whereas just make even a one file thing with the main and everything just in one little file that runs. Your examples need to be runnable, because that way I can start playing with it, see how it works, get a feel for it. But there are so many of these packages out there that say example, and they show like, I don't know, 6 lines.
Is there a way that, for example, like piggybacking on your idea and Simon's, like if there's a way to, in these like gallery examples, like if there's a way to embed the dartpad.dev editor in there, and then you see the thing running. You can actually do that, see more context
in the Google Docs, and I believe in your readmes, you can just like embed an iframe.
And there you go. So more idea for other folks out there. You can just embed like a workable version of your code.
You can also just like link out to the Dartpad URL. So
link it
out. Dartpad. Most people don't realize this. If you just make a gist with your code, main.dart gist, take the hash of your gist, stick it in the URL for your Dartpad. As the Dartpad ID, and it will magically use your code. You can copy that link, put it in any of your articles, and it will always link to your gist.
Yep.
So you can go update your gist if you want to, and it will update all those reference pieces of code. So very handy.
I'm going to step out and go behind the scenes for a while, so I'll give you more room on the screen for your showing stuff. Yeah, Randall. I'll be.
Right. Oh, sorry, Randall. So Roberto, let's see. Next question. Is it true that there's a high cost of late fields in variables? True, there's a high cost of late fields. I mean, cost. I wouldn't say there's. Okay, so when a field's late, it has to be checked to see if it's been set on each access, which means there is an additional comparison taking place. I don't think it's a high cost, right? If it was for example, a late nullable, again, you now have to do a check. Is it set and is it not null? Right. So these are things that you have to consider. But to be honest, like you have to be accessing a lot of late variables many times a second for there to be any problem, right? And this kind of comes into micro optimizations. You kind of get that feeling of, oh, there's always a more efficient way of doing something, but I've seen it before. You can get code that's way more efficient, but then it just is completely unreadable and unmaintainable, right? And that's not any use to anyone, really, right?
So then there's the on that point though, what if you're using a builder and the builder is looping and producing a whole bunch of children in a column or in a single child scroll view or something like that, making widget after widget, and each one has an instance of a late. Now, if you do it in a list view, you're going to limit the number because it's only going to build like how many you can see on the list view plus like one on each side.
Oh, list view builder, yeah.
Yeah, for a list view builder, that'll handle it better. But if you use a delegate for something else, you probably need to be aware that you're not cranking out 1,000 of them.
I think this is more about, again, early optimization, right? So I do agree. There's obvious things where you go, oh, that's happening a lot of times. Maybe I shouldn't do that, right? But accessing a late variable is not one of them, right? You imagine that even if you do a loop and you display 100 widgets screen, it's 100 times it has to check that variable. That's not a lot, right? It's when it's a compounding problem. If it was 100 and then you did that 60 times a second, so now suddenly you've got what, 600? 6,000 times. Now you're accessing that in 1 second. Now that compounding problem is a thing that you need to think about. But accessing late variables is not one of them. They're very much, they were introduced as a language feature and made very optimal. So I would not worry about late at all.
And you could also look at like, why do you want to implement that lazy initialization of your variable? For example, in my case, I've used it in the cases where, let's say I have a stateful widget and then I create a late variable, but then I know that in the init state, I'm going to initialize it. And then it's initialized up front. So maybe look at your case as why do you want to do that lazy initialization, or you want to initialize it later on, but you got to make sure that, by that the time that the check is done, like your application doesn't blow up because it wasn't appropriately or timely initialized.
Another interesting question. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, does making the late final change anything?
Oh, late final. Oh, but it says late.
Well, I'm asking if it changes it.
Well, this is what I was just thinking, right? Because once a final variable is set, it always returns that value. So what what I can imagine what might be happening is a late variable has a getter attached to it, which throws the lazy initialization exception. And then once you set the variable, that is then removed, and now you're using that variable's contents in the return response from the getter. So now you can imagine that in that implementation, there's no cost attached to that. You're just calling the function and returning back the value. Correct. So again, yeah, pinch of salt. I think pinch of salt. If you start talking about language features like that, you're talking about optimizations that you couldn't possibly consider in your application. That's a language optimization level problem. And if there was a problem with that, it would be addressed at the language level and nothing to do with Flutter specifically. It's Dart at that point, true. Right?
Yeah, because we've got to remember Dart is not Flutter and Flutter is not Dart.
Great.
So we conflate them a lot. So
next question. Eli, I just saw a neat video from Flutter Vikings about creating a watch OS companion app using method channels. And I'm a little new to that. Do you guys have any tips on using method channels? Yes. There's great documentation on the Flutter website. In fact, I will share that on stream. There's also a package called Pigeon, and Pigeon does code generation for method channels. So that can kind of, point you in the right direction. But you always should learn how it's done yourself. So that's what I'd say about that, right? It's great to use a package to do some code generation, but yeah, definitely definitely try it yourself. Right, let's see if I can get this shit. Hang on. Button. There we go. Let me hide the question here so Roman's not hidden. So yeah, you go into the docs on the flutter.dev website, and over here on the left, you got platform integration, and then you got a couple of areas, writing platform specific code. I don't know why it seems taking a long time to load. Anyway, and this talks about that what you're talking about, the method channel and how it works and the principles of which, and all some stuff about the thing. But the key here is when you can actually create, you can do Flutter create. It's not explained here actually. I think it's on another screen. It might be packages and plugins, developing packages and plugins. There's actually a template in Flutter create. That's it. You can say Flutter create template package. You can also replace the word package here with the word plugin. If you do that, you'll get a default plugin implemented with Objective-C, I think it's Swift now, Swift code and Kotlin code, and an example of getting the version of your operating system from platform specific code over to Dart, and you can that sort of gets you going on the very beginning. But there's these examples in here of doing this, and it's all explained. There you go. Look, create org template plugin and what platforms you want to support, and away you go. But yeah, it's very worth it. I don't know if there's any specific. I don't know if I could say that if there's any specific. Apart from the documentation, I don't think there's any guides I've seen. Have you guys seen any really good articles or anything?
I've only worked a little bit with method channels. I've been working a lot more with Dart FFI directly, calling C++ libraries, low-level libraries from Dart. and I can tell you that the documentation has improved a lot in that. And of course, you know, Team Sneed has provided great insights on that, great tutorials and documentation in that front. So I think the documentation, along with the code samples that have been put out there, I think they're a little bit more mature and have helped people create their own packages. You know, talking through method channels to do like individual platform implementations, and even like me, I've been building a couple of applications where we talk directly to like C++ and C libraries, and like we were mentioning earlier in previous occasions, you know, you can build really robust applications in Flutter that focus on what Flutter does best, and then you leave the heavy lifting and the, you know, implementation of low-level logic to those third-party libraries, which is pretty good.
I've definitely been doing some FFI myself, and FFI, for those that don't know, is foreign function interface. Basically means that you can have your Dart code called out to native code directly without going through any method channels or serialization.
Correct.
It has its purpose. It has its purpose, and it's very low level. It's not a beginner thing. So just
which I'm kind of chuckling because we're talking about platform channels. Romans work much deeper than those and kind of skipped them. Yeah. And I've worked on UI almost extensively, so I haven't needed them. And usually if I run into something that needs them, I shovel it off to Simon and let him deal with it.
Oh, thanks.
But Scott, at least you and I agree on the fact that when people say, oh yeah, from Flutter, I could not talk to Bluetooth directly. Oh no, you should not be doing that. You're doing it wrong. Flutter is, it's
a UI toolkit. UI toolkits are not supposed to talk to the hardware.
Of course not. Yes. Oh, you can't do it.
Why we have packages.
That's true. You cannot do it.
And no, that functionality does not belong in the framework.
Not at all.
I always something I just quickly answer is there's a great package by Philips Hue. So we get this question quite often, and I'll bring this up. There's a great package called Flutter Reactive BLE by meethue.com, which is actually Philips Hue, the people that make the light bulbs. And this is what they use because their mobile phone app, the Philips Hue mobile phone app, is built in Flutter, and they use it to control their light bulbs. And this is how it's all worked. They actually have a really great package that deals with Bluetooth, and this is the kind of thing that you want to be using. Right?
Correct. Shout out to Philip there.
Indeed.
A public repo to the Frogate. Oh, a lot of people are already asking for that. I have 2 more episodes to complete. I'm cleaning up the code because the next couple of the sessions that I have, the remaining sessions, are to actually publish the game publicly in live stream. We're going to be doing that in the next session. So stay tuned for that. Yes, I will be providing the full code to that game because again, this is this is building out in the open, which is a new methodology where you build out, sharing your code. Again, I'm not doing any state secret stuff, so I will definitely be sharing that code. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys.
Talking about your live streams, can you post a link for?
Here's the people.
And things should be a little calmer around here now. I got the wife to call the dog. She actually got her toy caught up in my VR headset and started to shake. So she wasn't biting the headset, but yeah.
Yeah, so people can get
and the fun can start now. John's here.
Hey, John. So let's next question.
Yeah.
What was this? Seed. So why we use Stream Builder or Future Builder? Because Future or Stream reach huge data from database. It's not about reading data from the database. It's just about a nice way of rebuilding your UI. You do not have to use Stream Builder. You do not have to use Future Builder. You can just use a future and then call set state and rebuild your widget. Because that's exactly how Future Builder works. If you go look at the source code of Stream Builder and Future Builder, is exactly how they work. It just gets rid of the complexity for you. So you don't have to create a stream subscription, cancel it on your dispose, and manage that connection to some asynchronous process happening in the background.
And what about monitoring the status? So much easier.
The nice thing is that I was going to say the nice thing they produce that async snapshot, which tells you the connection status, if it's active, it's waiting, if it's produced some content yet, if you have a data, if you have an error, it's all kind of wrapped up for you, which makes it nice. But there's plenty of libraries out there that do alternatives. You can go use those.
Again, that's something that gives you a lot more capability. If you only need the future and none of that other stuff, use future.
The nice thing about streams is more about the fact that you can actively change what's on the screen. So you produce one result, it produces the UI, and then some other action somewhere else can cause that content on the UI to change, because you can have it output another item on the stream, and then your UI changes. And that's the reactive power of using something like streams for building your UI. So Stream Builder and Future Builder, you don't have to use them, but they're easy go-tos. In fact, Randall, who's in the background here, he has a YouTube video that explains all about how best to use them and some of the common mistakes that people use. Common mistakes people have them. So.
And yes, unfortunately, a lot of people maybe have not like grasped the concept of how to use futures effectively in Flutter even. So it's a great topic that, people should like review and make sure to grasp that concept correctly, because everybody knows, how a future works in Flutter, how futures get added to the event loop, and how they get executed, because they're not a separate isolate. A lot of people think like, oh, is it a separate thread? No, it's not a separate thread. It's not a separate isolate. It's just something that gets put into the event loop until the next, frame cycle that can execute that. So please also take a look at that. Make sure that you grasp that concept.
So there is actually a great article on the Dart website called Concurrency in Dart, which explains it all. And it also shows you lovely pictures about how it all works and examples and all this lovely fun stuff.
Oh, that's
so
good.
I will post that in the chat for people to go look at later.
Side note, we have now hit the point of 9 questions with 14 minutes left. We are breaking our 2 minutes per question rule, so we got to cut it.
Let's cut it. Let's do it.
So we will answer what we got.
Yeah. Is there a way to get that?
Is there a way to get the IME number of devices? Okay, so that's the what's it called? The international subscriber number.
Yeah, it's the actual device number.
Yeah, you got the device ID, and then you got the subscriber ID from the SIM, which is IMSI or something like that. There's 2 of them. Anyway, the answer is not anymore. So for a long time you could do that, and now there's policy in place on most devices that restrict access to personally identifiable information. Now, there might be, if you release your app as a device administration app, then you do have access to that. And there might be a few other, maybe you can request permission for the IME.
Yeah, because I would have a little bit of a problem with this, because if people download your app and you have some type of trial or something, and then they get rid of it and then they re-download it again, if you're it's like somebody erasing cookies and they could just keep restarting. But if you've got the IMEI, and also bans, things like if you were running a Twitter substitute, right, and you've got somebody who came on there and was very abusive and you ban them, that ban should take something that the difference is if they just change to a new username, they can slip right around it. And you can't really do an IP ban, because what if, all the rest of the people in their house, or, you usually do a domain, that'll lock a lot of people out.
Throw the phone
I'm sorry. Yeah. If you get the IMEI, you can lock that device out forever. It doesn't matter how many accounts they try to create.
This is the whole thing, but it can also be used to mistreat and track people.
So can everything.
Well,
I mean, beacons can be used for that.
But again, it's like, you have to, you're asking permission for those things. There's certain things that you need to basically tell the user you're getting, and it'll pop up with system permissions. Anyway, the other side of this is a great way to track it without any. So first of all, if you do want to get the IME number, you have to use method channels. I'm sure there's probably a package that on pub that they will give you. Actually, device info plus might give it to you. But the problem with this is that you don't even need to use anything from the platform to do what you're trying to do. For example, let's say you're trying to, again, I don't know what the reason is you're trying to get the IME number, but let's say you're trying to lock something down or treat a login as unique to a certain device. then what you're supposed to do is generate a UUID or unique ID for your device when your app first starts up. So you check to see, does it exist on like in a file, like JSON file in the app directory? If it doesn't exist, you generate one and put it in the app directory. Now, every time the app is launched, it uses the same ID. Doesn't matter if they log out and log back in, they're going to be using the same ID.
Okay, what if they uninstall and reinstall?
This is, but now that data is restored and returned by the operating system. So Android and iOS you can add that file into the restore and recovered stuff for when you install.
Somebody would have to really be able to hack their own device in order to get around that one.
You can get around. Don't get me wrong, you can get around it, but it's not about that. The point here is that now you're identifying a device, right? And if that's all you're trying to do, then that's the perfectly reasonable way of doing it. You're not getting any like personally identifiable information that can be used in other platforms and other places. You've identified the device, but just generate an ID and storing it in a shared preferences or on disk or whatever. So, that's the way to do that.
Next question.
Roberto, I've looked through stepper code and saw it used list view with Shrinkwrap enabled. As far as I understand, even the Flutter team does not recommend using Shrinkwrap. Why do they build? Why do they not build what they preach?
There's always a case for something, or they will get rid of it.
So Shrinkwrap is perfectly fine to use if you have a finite set of objects. So let's say I know that my steps are 10 and I'm going to use a list view. Then I know I'm going to call and display 10 items, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. The problem is when people put Shrinkwrap around something that is infinite in size. Suddenly that's a big problem because it will never finish, right? The same goes if you use Shrinkwrap on something that just keeps building and requesting more data and building and requesting more data. That's essentially the same as infinite. Also, you don't want to, let's say you got 5,000 items returned, in your news feed or something. You do Shrinkwrap. That would be really, really bad because now it doesn't just build that one widget you see on screen. It now builds 5,000 widgets you can't see on the screen and your app just explodes, right? This is why they're saying don't use Shrinkwrap, right? It's there for a reason. And the reason is to give you this support in a certain minute fashion. But to be honest, it's not a Shrinkwrap it shouldn't be used in any real conditions. There's a very few conditions where you should use Shrinkwrap. Sorry, I kind of stole the answer there. Is anyone going to?
No, you're fine.
All right, someone else can read the next question. I'm just talking. Come on. Do you want to read the question out loud, Scott?
I have had issues using scrollable widgets in Flutter Web. They're not scrolling specifically where they're deep in the widget tree. Do you know any reason for this? Yes. You have to really understand what is grabbing your pointer, because you've got, don't forget, your web page might need to scroll. Your widget might need to scroll. There are people trying to do scrollables inside of list views simultaneously and then throw that on a web page. Now you got 3 layers deep that might be trying to scroll. And, something, I'm sorry, but it's a similar thing, I believe, to what the problem that Simon and I had with a video player grabbing the pointer, even though we had put things over top of it to intercept it. And that required a package called Pointer Interceptor that was created by the Flutter team.
It's not made by the Flutter team. It's made by Google. It's not a primary package. It's Google.dev. So it's a which I don't know what you call it, second party package. So I would also say something else that people get wrong when creating scrollable widgets. They don't create their own scroll controllers. You always need to give your scroll view or any scrollable object a scroll controller.
The scroll controller, yeah.
Unless it is the top level single scroll view for your content. Now, what happens is a route, when you create a route, even if it's 2.0, Navigate 2.0 version 1, a route gets made and the route wraps your entire route, the entire contents of your route in what's called a primary scroll controller. And what that does is it creates a scroll controller and manages the primary one, the main one for your content. Now, what you can do is you can wrap any part of your code. Let's say you now have content within your main part of your screen, you can now wrap that in your own primary scroll controller, and any scroll view that gets made inside that will request the scroll controller from the primary scroll controller. That's what it does. And in fact, there's a constructor for primary scroll controller which literally says no scroll controller. So primary scroll controller dot none or something to explicitly stop and throw errors on content which tries to use it when they shouldn't. So for most of the time, most people forget. They just create a list view and don't manage the scroll controller. They create a single chart scroll view and don't manage the scroll controller. You're going to have problems. So
and another way to look at it also, like another, just like from another perspective, also reevaluate your user experience. Like scroll, like Scott said, you're trying to do too many scrolls and too many nested scrolling. It's time to rethink that approach as well. So just in a simple way to look at it.
But yeah, and another point too, as well, is web is a special case.
Yes, also.
Because you can have various things trying to intercept that pointer and steal it away from what you want. You need to be aware of that when you're dealing with web.
Correct.
I want to make sure I'm correct at this before I show it, but if I remember rightly, there's actually a flag. Yes, let me just bring this up on screen here quickly. Yeah, so when you use the constructor, you'll see it says here primary. If you don't specify false, if you specify false, it'll create and manage its own scroll controller, right? But by default, it's true, right? It doesn't say that it's not got a default value, but if it's null, if it's default, it's true, and it goes up the tree to find the primary scroll controller, which is just a widget that hosts a scroll controller for the rest of the screen. It's all explained. It's all explained in here. Yeah, and this has that as I said, primary scroll controller none to make sure that part of the tree is not associated with the primary scroll controller, which you should also be using when you can. All right, hope that helps.
A couple of I was going to say just a couple of quick points I'm noticing in the chat on the whole stream and future thing. Yes, you do need to use a stateful widget with a stream or future because they change a state. And that's the whole point. And also, if you're having trouble with the verbosity of stateful widget, just use the templates. Android Studio or IntelliJ, they have live templates, and in VS Code, they already have snippets. You type out like 6 letters.
I'm going to also mention this. Most people seem to forget they can create their own widgets. And what I mean by this is Flutter uses composition. So let me explain. Let's say you had something every screen does, which is to fetch content and display it on the screen. And if there's an error, display an error. And if, I don't know, you don't get any data back, it says an empty or something. That is a common pattern. So you make one widget that performs that common pattern with any future for any type of data. You use what's called generics. Now you've made that one widget. You can now use that across your code. You're not copying and pasting. It's not verbose. You've kept. It's called single responsibility, or keep it simple. Like
simple, KISS.
So there's principles in place. This is just general programming good practice. If you've got code, if you're ever copying and pasting any section of your code, that's a bad code smell. You're doing it wrong.
Yep.
Rethink what you're doing.
Do widget composition, right? Correct.
Yeah. All right. Next question. I noticed that a class can only be declared as a const with all the variables set to final. Does it have a bigger impact when using late? No more const.
There's a way around this, and that is you declare your late in the state if it's stateful. Don't declare it in the widget.
Well, hang on. You're assuming that he's talking about widgets. That's what I was going to say. So from a perspective of so const itself it means that your object that you're defining, your class, your instance of a class that gets created is actually instantiated instead of at runtime. It's instantiated at compile time. So when you press that play button, it compiles it, or you do Flutter build. It compiles it then, and it ships the compiled class, that instance of the class, with all the variables set to their initial states in your code, so that when it starts up, it doesn't have to create the object and call the constructor and do all that kind of stuff. It's just there. That's the optimization that you get. Now, what's really clear is that's not an optimization in itself. Having one object like that makes practically no difference. It's when you have a nested tree of objects. That suddenly you have object calls another constructor, calls another constructor, calls another constructor. Before you know it, you have this huge hierarchy of objects that's repeating. And that, if it can be done once, has an impact, especially when you're building UI and you have to open up a screen instead of the build method. Instead of a build method having to call those constructors before it can return a frame, it's just there because it's already been built. So that's why it's always nice to have const widgets and final widgets. Now, because widgets themselves are configuration, they should always be there. In fact, marked as @immutable, the underlying widget, because they should always be final. A very common mistake is to have those parameters inside your widget not final. They should always be final. That means every widget class should be const.
Yep.
Right?
Now, a point on that, which is a fun one of my favorites. You might be like, okay, but a stateful widget is going to change state, so therefore, how can it be const? Fun fact, there is no such thing as a stateful widget. It's named that, but widgets never change state. None of them. Point. Not even a stateful widget. Okay, what's changing state is the state object that is being called by your stateful widget. So widgets you can have a const stateful widget, and it's the state object that's changing state.
Very good point. I hope we can.
That's why that's why I said. Oh, I'm sorry, but that's why I said put the late in the state.
Yeah.
And use either a init state or the build method in order to initialize it, and then you're fine because your widget is still const. You're not waiting to have any of its variables initialized.
There's also another, so something that's quite common and has become common, especially in mobile development over the years, has been making models that are immutable, meaning that you have a copy with method normally, that you have. So basically means that each time you want to change a parameter or some variable inside some model, you have to create and instantiate a completely new instance. The benefit of this means that you can use the identical match to see if two things are actually the two references to an object are exactly the same object, and it's very quick, it's very efficient, and a lot of the time you don't want to. There's not a lot of time that you actually want to mutate your state. It's a lot of the time it's about reading and displaying and using state. So to bring this back, so probably all your models should be final and const.
And as they're saying in chat, there is no spoon widget.
There is no spoon. All right. Is there a way to add a value to a list at a defined position?
Mm-hmm.
Like yes, there is.
Now here's another question though. Are you talking about a list view, or are you talking about a list object as in the equivalent of an array or our version of an array? So when you just say list, I mean, that's easy, but trying to reach into the middle of a list view, a little trickier, but not impossible.
So you have insert, index, element.
You can do insert and then pass that index. And like Scott mentioned, if you're trying to preserve your order of your widgets, make sure to also use keys because you like unique keys. That's why we'll preserve like your order. You can insert, but make sure that also gets acquainted. But
So I give an example. Let's say I just want to give a clear example of this. Let's say you have a list view on your UI, and it has just text widgets. For each, it's a list view built in, has a text widget for each one, and all it does is displays the value 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on the index of the list, right? So you can create and use an inset to change your state. So you have a list of integers, and you insert a new variable. Now, what's going to happen with your builder at that point, if you did not use keys, because they're all the same adjacent widgets, it will change the data, not just for the. Let's say you insert into the second position the number 10, right? It was 1, 2, 3, whatever. Now it's going to be 1, 10. 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen here, though, is that the widget number 2 does not move. It does not change. Its data gets changed to 10. The number 3 is going to be changed from 3 back to 2, and so on and so forth. It repeats down, which means you get this kind of sort of domino effect of everything below in the UI changing. Now, if you put keys on those, and the key can just be a value key with a string with the index in, right? What's going to happen is the Flutter's going to know that they are exactly the same widget, and it's going to push it down on the screen, relay it out below, keeping all the state. They're not getting rebuilt. They're not. They're all none of those widgets and all the hierarchies inside getting rebuilt, and instead one new widget for the value 10 that you've inserted is going to be made. That's why we say if you have adjacent widgets with the same type, that is the same class, and no key, they should always have a key. So sibling widgets should always of the same type should always have a key. That's the rule.
And that is a great optimization here.
Speaking of performance, and there's something I think it's important for us to always put it out there, and I don't remember hearing it today. Death God says, why is Flutter Web poor in performance? Now, please don't be insulted, but the first answer is you're doing it wrong. That's why you've got lousy.
I'm going to hijack your answer and say you're doing it wrong.
Okay, but in all seriousness, you probably really are doing it in a way that is poor performant, probably by mistake. Number one, if you're trying to make a website in Flutter, there's your answer. Okay, Flutter is for web apps. I would barely even do a single page, let alone a whole website. And then, there may be some other reasons depending on what you're trying to do. But especially if you're doing 3, 4, 5 pages on your Flutter web app, that's a really good indication. Sorry.
So I was also going to mention that a lot of the time people just want to take their Flutter app that they've made, which is let's say for Android, and just stick it on the web and make it run on the web. That will never work for the purpose of when you run your Android app on a device, that device is now just running your code that's compiled for the CPU. It's very optimal, right? And it's normally just the app that's running in the foreground. Like all the other apps have been paused and all the rest of it. Like you've got a very huge bandwidth in comparison to a website. A website is a small piece of Java code running. Even the large web apps that you have do tremendous things to try and optimize, right? They compile with WASM and minification and all sorts of things to try and get that performance down, because the browser itself has an interface layer. It's got DOM, it's got CSS, it's got JavaScript, it's got all these things running to run an app on the web, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not Flutter that is poor performing. It's probably your app originally was not well performing enough for web. That's what we're saying. You're doing it wrong, right? It's you need to go back, performance profile your app. Now, one of the other things that I'm going to mention here, especially for the beginners, and that is you're always running and testing in debug. Debug does a bunch more stuff in the background to support hot reload and all sorts of fun things that slows the app down. So if you're trying to see what the performance is like, run your app in profile or in release and see what's going on.
And also be aware of the 2 types of renderers that are available in Flutter Web. You have HTML renderer and the Canvas kit renderer.
So there are a ton of things that could be going on here.
So just to be clear, there is actually a documentation page on Flutter. I'll just pop it in the chat. I'm just going to bring it up here quickly because people miss this. Web renderers, this is what Roman was talking about. And there's HTML renderer and Canvas kit renderer. And you can actually specify on the command line when you run it to run it with either whichever one you want, Canvas kit or HTML, and you can see what the performance is. If you don't specify one, it does auto, which means it supports both. And what will happen is depending on the device and the configuration, for example, here, I think it tells you somewhere in here. Basically, if it's on web, it uses one, and if it's on mobile, it uses one.
If it's on mobile browsers, it loads the HTML, and if it's on a desktop, or it does the Canvas kit. But it's a great point.
I've actually seen the Canvas kit work perfectly fine on mobile, and there's good reasons to do that. So again, you don't have to be overly specific about this, but yeah, there's great documentation examples, and you should try it out, because you might find that your particular thing that you're doing is better because you're doing a lot of custom painting to do it in Canvas kit, for example.
Very good point.
So again, like you're also, I mean, a good example. So something else. What you're rendering inside your Flutter app is painted into the browser. The browser actually takes that. Then it does a bunch of other stuff. It's then printed in the browser window. The operating system takes that, then it sends it over to the graphics card, and then it's processed by the graphics card. There's a huge number of stages that is actually taking place to get your content on the screen. A lot more than would it be if it was a native app. So,
and speaking of native, there was a point made about native in the chat real quick, and we have 5 questions left, and we're already over time. But another important point, one of the things you have to remember as far as performance goes, native versus Flutter. First of all, a lot of times native has to be interpreted because it's bytecode. Flutter is ahead of time compiled. It's an EXE. So in a lot of ways, Flutter is more performant in that respect. There are other things that help, the Android OS and iOS operating systems to speed up on their side too. So, things are not always faster with Flutter, but I'm sorry, but one other thing, but you have to remember that your Android app or your Windows app or whatever is compiling to a binary executable. You take that same app and drop it into the web, it's compiling to JavaScript. This is a whole different world, a whole different performance profile, and it might require you to change the way you're writing your app. So there's so many things involved in trying to get a web app that will run with the similar performance to a device.
I want to also express that the Dart team are working on this. The Dart team are currently experimenting with WASM. So Dart to WASM. So instead of Dart to Jazz, Dart to WASM. And there's this great article. I'll put it in the chat for everyone, for people that are interested to read. But it's about the difference in terms of trying to run, and compile and run Dart code using what's called WebAssembly. That's WASM for short. And that can be more performant because WASM closely mirrors the lower levels. That's more like assembler, which is the machine code, the stuff that Flutter compiles to, and all the CPUs run. So yeah. Anyway, we'll shut up. Let's get back to the actual questions because people have been waiting.
5
I'm here for Roman.
remaining.
Is that what you used for the? You have to make sure you put your context in your questions. So
Yeah.
we all know what you're talking about. Is that what you used for the app to control your smart devices?
So that one that I built was actually a Flutter application just talking to smart devices via HTTP. So some of these devices that you've seen out there that have their own encapsulated like HTTP modules and services running inside of the device, you can talk through any application from any application to those devices. They have open APIs that you can just connect over Wi-Fi, and they even have they provide you with like an IP address, like a dedicated IP address, and you can just make calls into those. So the application that I built is just a Flutter application talking to those devices via HTTP calls, and they have very comprehensive APIs like on, off, for example, like change the light intensity and stuff like that. You can build it. You can create it with any other mobile application framework. I built it with Flutter because I wanted to eliminate, for example, like a middle layer, like a proxy server, or you could do that. But I wanted to have like the biggest bang for my buck. I wanted to just talk directly to those devices. Yes, you could do those. I suggest the Shelly family of smart devices. There's also this new type of let's say standard coming soon. I think it's already released, Matter, and you can use that kind of like as a standard for communicating with smart devices. So you can do Flutter straight to like a Shelly device. You just plug the device, connect it to your Wi-Fi, and the Flutter application can talk directly to those devices. And you can control devices around your house and make like a pretty smart home environment in your home. So yes, you can do that.
I want to just do a PSA on that one and say that I just no, just because it has to say these are inherent. What Roman was doing is fine if you're on the Wi-Fi, if you're on your local private Wi-Fi that you know who's on that Wi-Fi. Because those devices are not secure. They're not secure at all. They're open HTTP.
Very good point.
There's no authentication. There's no SSL certificate. There's no encryption. There's no nothing.
Yep.
Exactly. It's completely open. It's like bog standard. So that's what Roman was saying about proxying. If you need to make that open, accessible to the outside world, the IP address that's fixed, that's static, is 192 or 10 or one of the internal IP address ranges, which you can go look up networking for that one. However, those are just internal to your network. If you try and access like a 192 address outside your network, it won't work because it's on the public internet. It's not on the internal
Correct. Very good point.
So the PSA I'd say here is you don't want to just like open up a port in your router and like port forward to this 192 address. That would be very, very bad because you just gave the internet access on a public IP address. People scan all the time, by the way. All these public IP addresses are scanned by hackers and all sorts of just security experts and all sorts, just trying to see what's open and what's going wrong. they can easily get access to that web page and turn on and off your lights remotely.
Yeah, if you see your lights flickering, yeah, be scared.
Flashing all over the place. Right?
And actually, it may just sound like fun, but actually, a lot of women being stalked have problems from their exes, turning off the thermostat in winter, locking them out of control, and things like that. So it's actually pretty darn serious.
So yeah, anyway, so if you do want to secure something like that, you can actually do it with Flutter still and Dart. You can create yourself a little proxy. You can secure it. You can put authentication in front of that internal IP address, and then you expose that publicly. And in doing that thing, you can have something running on a desktop or on a laptop or on a Raspberry Pi or whatever, and it's there running, and it will securely proxy on the requests so that your app, when you're outside, for example, on the internet, you can put in your public IP address for your home internet connection or host name or whatever you've got set up, and you can turn off your lights or oven or whatever you have plugged in remotely, right? So
and a quick plug for Firebase App Check, that you could actually add that as a layer of security so that you know that the traffic is only coming from your application as opposed to from like a third-party place. So that's just one thing that you can add to that. But yes, do you have any other questions?
we have a few more to get through. Just four more.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Stream builder versus value listable builder. Which one for what and why? Thanks.
Well, go ahead. No,
I was going to say they're two different things, right? So a stream builder is about a stream of data, right? So you're constantly updating that stream. You might be able to record history. Now with streams, it's a specified interface, meaning that there's other packages like RxStart that give you stuff that you can map and switch and process that pipeline of the stream and manipulate the data in some way. Join two streams together, join 5 streams together, do all sorts of weird and funky things to process the data for your UI. That's what streams provide you. Value listable builder, I'd say, is more about taking something like a value notifier or any sort of value listable. So a lot of the framework use value listable, like on Scroll Control or whatever else there is. I think it's Scroll Control. There's a bunch of them are backed by listables. And that allows you to react to your UI to some of the inbuilt framework things that are not streams of data. They're just notifications of data being changed.
See, deep inside, though, if I remember correctly, all those things are using streams at some level, but you don't have to mess with them.
Value listable does not. It's all the value listable. So
okay.
Value listable builder is just a widget that registers itself to a listenable, and a listenable has a standard interface of add listener, remove listener. That's it, right? And notify listener. That's the entire interface. It doesn't even tell you how those should be, all the listeners should be recorded. That's down to implementation. That's what a value listenable does. It's an implementation of that. It just loops around, calls each of the registered listeners functions until it's finished. That's it. It's super straightforward. And it's called. You'll see it in, if you use Unity, it's the delegate pattern that they use in Unity. It's used all over the place. It's standard. Like on web, it's add event listener, remove event listener. It's the same thing. You're just adding a function, your function that you own, to something else that once it gets something happen on it, it'll call your function, and you're getting what's called a callback. It's the same on if you have like a form element you do on changed. It's a callback to you. So a value listable is just a list of callbacks, essentially. And it holds a value. Anyway, we get the next question up. I'm using an expansion tile in a list view.builder, but I would like to only one at a time expanded. Welcome to the world of problems with expansion tile. In fact, this is a known problem. I had this problem years and years ago when in version 1 or something of Flutter. There's been several packages out there that remedy this. I think there's actually like expansion body or something. I feel like there's another widget that if you wrap it with. But yeah, if you're trying to use a list view builder with expansion tile, you're all bets are off. I'd say that what you can do, from my personal experience, if you want to do something really, really simple, and that is you could wrap an expansion tile in a widget that just updates the expanded state based on registering with a parent. So basically, you can imagine you wrap your entire list view in a stateful widget that keeps a list of the tiles and which one is the expanded one, for example. And then when you expand one, it calls back and goes through all the rest of them, telling them to collapse.
That's pretty much what's going to happen. It's going to rebuild all the other widgets, but at least you're going to keep, your state above. Like you lift the state, and then you can keep track of which one is expanded or not. So that's
lift your state up. And that you can do that without any state management or anything like that. As we said earlier, it's context.ancestor state of type, and you can just get to that parent state. You can say and wrap things. Yeah. I'm just looking. Expansion panel list is the widget. That's the one I was thinking of. So expansion panel list is designed for this purpose. It actually does like a radio. Here we go, like radio type effect. So you expand one.
Pretty cool.
It actually has the radio effect here, which is the one you're looking for. Where
you see, I don't recall this one, so I would have created it myself.
Here you go. Look. Here's what you're looking for, right? Where only one stays open. But again, it's not a list view builder. It has its own thing. Where is it? Expansion panel radio and
expansion panel list.
Expansion panel list. Interesting.
Yeah, but
line 65
that you pass. Yeah.
And they call it radio probably because there's only one that is expanded, kind of like a radio button group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or can you expand more than one at a time?
You can if you use the non-radio one. So that's the first one. If you do the normal one, then when it runs, come on.
Hello.
Run. The one time I want you, and you're live on stream, mate. Okay, well, whatever. Try and refresh. Give one more chance. I'm in the bottom of the list. Everyone's gone to the website right now, and it's gone to bump to the bottom of the list. Anyway, yeah. Cool. So so I'll put that in the chat for you. So it's expansion panel list radio.
Very cool. And then there were two.
Right. A new person who wants to create a mobile application, what should he choose? Flutter, native Android development framework? Well, you're asking 3 Flutter developers, so what are we going to say?
Well, but the other thing too, I mean, we do have Android experience, and here's the thing: if you're trying to learn them both from scratch, I would choose Flutter just because it's easier to learn. I beat my head on the desk for Android a lot. The other thing too is if you learn Flutter, then you have the ability to release to 9 different platforms now. It's insane, including Electronic Ink.
Mohit, I want to know, put in the chat right now, in the few minutes we got remaining, if you're still here, put in the chat, have you got previous programming experience and what the program is? Is it Kotlin?
It matters.
Is it JavaScript? Because you might find that, if you've got previous Kotlin experience on some other platform, then bringing up Android might be easier for you, right? There's other questions around it, but to be honest, we're going to say Flutter, and I think it has an easier learning curve, especially with hot reload and hot restart. It kind of gets you going in the sort of try, fail, try again loop.
And
the other thing, though, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rom.
No, just like you said, I was going to say, even if I'm going to build an application only for Android, I still do it in Flutter. Why? Because I'm future-proofing my application. In the event that I want to release it for iOS, I already have halfway.
Just stole my comment.
Exactly.
Do you think you'll ever want to release this somewhere else other than Android? Because if you do, then you have to rebuild it from scratch if you use Android.
Correct.
So it's one of the things that we had this problem not a problem. So we had this at the very beginning. It's like we started using Flutter. This is the company, sorry, that I'm talking about. We started using Flutter, and we started getting just requests for I want an iOS app or I want an Android app, and it's like we just did it in Flutter because it made more sense to do that. Mm-hmm. And then if they go, oh, I want to release it on Android or the alternative platform, it's like, oh, okay, done.
And we're giving you the same answer. Actually, I talked to Stacy Davino about this like a week ago. We were out having dinner with about 30 very loud people at a bar. And Roman knows what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes.
So we were talking about this, and Stacy and I were in complete agreement. I mean, it's whether you want to use native or Flutter totally depends on your use case. There are times when you're going to want to use native for certain kinds of performance.
Agreed.
But if your app is fairly simple, or if you're looking to release to multiple platforms, Flutter is usually going to be your choice.
No question.
But not always.
Yep. Okay. Nearly there. is there any plan to reduce stateful widget verbosity? And
I don't get what verbosity.
What?
I don't understand. I've been doing this for 5 years. I don't know.
I mean, the thing is, let me just say something here, Haber. Stateful widget. First of all, we're not the Flutter. First of all, we're not a Flutter team. We may wear Flutter t-shirts. We're a Flutter community. We don't have any ownership over the product. And
Thank you, Neeli, for the new shirt.
So we can't make that determination, right? However, I want to say that stateful widget is just based on widget, just based on element. These are things that are in the framework. If you want something different, people have already made things like hook. Hook's another library. Hook widget that reduces the verbosity, like you were saying, and they've made that themselves, right? Like nothing's stopping you from making your own less verbose version for whatever your use case is. So just go ahead and do it. If you want to plan it. And then if you're like, if you come up with something great, you think it would be great for the community, release it as a package. I'm sure you'll get some people using it. So yeah. Anything to add? No. All right. I saw one last question in the chat. I know we're over, but one last question in the chat. It's 2 questions. Can Flutter have any claim in server side in the future? It already does.
It already does.
It already does. So first of all, Dart.
Well, okay. Wait. Flutter or Dart?
Dart. I don't. Oh, good point. Yes. We immediately gravitated to Dart. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So first of all, yes. Again, we fell into the same problem we always talk about. Flutter and Dart are not the same thing. So yes, Dart on the server side, Dart compiles to machine code, and all the rest of it. That all works server side. Deploys Docker containers. It's wonderful. I did a 3-part series on the Flutter channel, Full Stack Dart with Craig. You can go look that one up in the Boring Show. When it says Flutter on the server side, if you wanted to, you could host an embedded version of Flutter, render the UI, and actually export a video to the client. Like this is like a lot of platforms, a lot of apps are now doing this, where all the UI clicks are being sent over the wire to a remote server that renders it and sends back a picture of it. We talk about over the top, but this keeps all their code off the client. This literally means that no one can hack it, no one can do it because it's not there. They just get a picture of what the result is. This is called server-side rendering. This is just part of server-side rendering. Server-side rendering could be different things.
Where was it that I just was reading about server-side UI? Which is close to the same
Angular, thing. Like Angular does like server-side and stuff.
So in fact, so I don't think Flutter will make that jump anytime soon because it's not designed that way. But we might be seeing in the future, right? How do you see future integration with Flutter? I don't know anything about future integration with Flutter. You said, would it be the main development kit? I like it to be. That'd be nice, and it already is predominantly used, as far as I understand it. And why not? So when it's used quite well. So
What I definitely would love a future is on Dart, full stack Dart. So it's already in Flutter, so that it lives in the server, so you can build like a RESTful APIs and that. I would love for it to be a first class citizen in Firebase functions. I mean, you could do like Cloud Run, and you can load like a Docker container running a Dart like little server in there. But it'd be great to be like a first class citizen as Cloud Functions.
I'm sure it's on its way.
Yeah.
So something else I want to mention here is a package that I'm always banging on about because I really like what
Flutter
Kenyon
Web
has been doing.
Flutter Web, yes.
It's Jasper Web.
Jasper
to be correct.
Yeah. Yes. So again, this does that server-side rendering, easy server-side incremental DOM updates and everything else. And in fact, there's an example here, which I'm just going to obviously I'm zoomed in, so it's going to there we go. So this is a sort of a replica of Jasper of Dart pads, so you can run Jasper stuff. But here, Bulma CSS, as you can see here, this is the output. This is Dart. Dart is rendering this on the screen. It's Dart with CSS to do all the rendering. This is Bulma CSS. And as you can see on the left here, you can just use Dart with widgets, and they're called components. Like here, a stateless component instead of a stateless widget. And then it outputs the button tag with the appropriate CSS attributes and listeners and whatever else. It just works. It's a wonderful thing. It's still very early, but it's awesome. And it solves that gap between rendering your UI in Dart on the server side on full web. And this is where you might want to build websites then with this, because it's exactly the same then as Angular and there's all the other JS packages, where Flutter is separate from that. So.
Okay. One quick thing before
All right.
we take on the second half of that. To David, we don't have the capability of removing a question. The only three things that could have happened are if we kicked you, you'd know it. If we muted you, you'd know it because YouTube would tell you. And if you had a link in there, YouTube blocks it, and we never get to see it either. So we never even know that you tried to post something with a URL in it because YouTube will reject it. Okay. Fuchsia. The other half of that question.
Well, okay. I mean,
you lost
yeah,
the other half.
No, I mean, we started talking about it. I didn't think we'd finished, but yeah. So what do we think about Fuchsia and with Flutter? I mean, I still haven't even run Fuchsia yet, so I can't really talk. I read all about the kernel and the state, the technology, and everything else.
What you have to realize. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I bought the Google Nest Hub Max thinking that I was going to be able to side load Flutter apps in it. Just like Simon says, like I'm still waiting for me to load my own apps in a Google device.
You can.
No, not on the only it was on the earlier versions, I think.
Yeah, on the early version. Yeah.
Tearing the bottom off doesn't work on the new ones? Because usually if you tear the bottom off, there's a USB port.
Yeah, but I think they were locked down. Anyway,
okay.
Besides,
another thing you remember, I'm sorry, with this is Fuchsia is an operating system. Okay, so Flutter and Fuchsia are not like equals working together. What it's more like is iOS operating system, Mac OS operating system, Windows, Android, Fuchsia. So take it easy, Matt. So remember, Fuchsia's on that level. It's written in Rust and I can't remember what else. Rust and C.
Probably.
So again, Flutter is just a UI toolkit on top. Now, what they did do for a while there was Flutter was the UI for Fuchsia. And you could create Flutter widgets directly on the desktop, which has some really cool possibilities if you remember the old KDE Plasma widgets.
So what's kind of nice, what's kind of interesting about that, actually, what you say is something that I think Groove and Chip was working on this. I may be wrong, but what?
No, I say Edward just now. Okay, I do not recommend ripping the bottom off of your Nest hubs.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do.
You already own some contact cement and know how to put it back.
I was going to do that too.
So anyway, back to Ruben has actually been. I think it was Ruben has actually been working on a. Wayland, the desktop system, right? You can actually host. He's made a thing where you can actually host Wayland desktop views in Flutter, meaning that you can replace your entire desktop with a Flutter app. Ooh. So the entire desktop environment is rendered in Flutter, but the windows can be any calculator app or browser or anything, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning that suddenly your entire desktop environment is Flutter, the entire your UI stack. So that's kind of interesting.
And then you can do all kinds of desktop widgets again.
Yeah.
You can have little applets all over your desktop.
This is it, right? Now I have actually had this side idea recently, and I want to run it past the people in the chat before we call it a day. And that is, I was actually thinking about putting together maybe a little prototype operating system myself because I've done it before. I've built operating systems before, but I thought I might try it with Dart. So basically, you still have to have some assembler and C at the low level, but basically, for the most part, the kernel will be written in Dart just for the hell of it. Maybe it'll be fun.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I know Dart compiles to AOT, but you think it'd be that performant?
I don't think it's going to win any. I don't know, but I don't think it's going to win any competition as a thing. But it might be an interesting thing to show. Look, you can do this stuff if you wanted to. Like it's not the language that inhibits you from doing this, right?
What was that they said in Jurassic Park? You got so excited about the idea you didn't bother to think if you should.
I know. That's why I'm like, should I? I'm really kind of like, it's an interesting idea, but I'm like, should I just waste that time doing that? Because there's no practical purpose to it at all.
I'd buy one. I mean, I'm remembering back to the
work done.
I remember back to the Smalltalk days when you had the entire Smalltalk image basically being your entire UI, but it was all malleable at the time you were playing with it, and I really missed that environment. It was really cool because it was basically Smalltalk all the way down to just the raw rendering stuff. It's pretty close actually to the Flutter model when you're looking at where you are with Skia and all that sort of stuff coming above that.
Okay. Well, I think
it?
we're over time, and I think we're at the end.
Yep.
We've got all the questions. So
Yeah, we went over
Randall.
150% of time, and now we have angry clients.
Right.
Randall,
Nobody's
John.
angry from me, but I just wanted to say, Roman, thank you for coming on the show.
No, thank you.
Your
guys.
answers were very insightful. I look forward to your live coding. We put the link in the stream. We'll do it one more time before we close out, hopefully.
Thank you guys.
And so just thank you for accepting my invitation to be on this show. And come back anytime, really.
Thank
You've
you
got
guys.
the
I
secret
always have a blast
handshake
with you
now.
guys. My pleasure.
And Edward, come back next week and let us know how your Nest Hub surgery is going.
Yeah, oh, that'll be interesting. Pictures, or it didn't happen.
And yeah, Kevin, you know we're past time. You know better than
You know
this.
we're
Come
way
back.
past. And Kevin,
Kevin,
you know
take
better.
me offline. I'll answer your questions, Kevin.
Okay, and Kevin, why didn't you ask us this over drinks last week?
Yeah, over drinks. Yeah, exactly.
When Roman and I and you were all together.
We were
with
right
Eli and-
next to each other. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
All right. Thank you again, and thank you for coming to the show. We'll see you again next week. Bye.
Next week, 167 hours. Come
Yeah.
back.
Take care.
Bye.
And get what?